Hello and welcome back to Grief Inspired. My name is Catherine McNulty and I bring light to the darkness of grief. And the light that I have for you today is Susan Ways. And I'm super excited to talk to you, Susan, because I love your podcast, Tendrils of Grief. I was humbled enough to be on it in March of this year, and I've continued listening, and I love all the conversations that you have. So tell us a little bit about what the podcast is, where people can find it so that they can start listening too.
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for your kind words. I really appreciate it. So Tendrils of Grief is on all podcasting sites, whatever you listen to, iHeartRadio, iTunes, Spotify, all the different podcasting sites. You can find it. You can also find it through my website, which is tendrilsofgrief.com. And all the podcasts are listed out there. So why I started it, I'm about a year and a half into this podcasting, a little bit more, but I lost my husband to cancer 4 years ago. We're coming up on the anniversary now, which is always a tough time still for me. And I couldn't really focus on reading. The grief group counseling wasn't working for me, but I needed something to soothe my soul. And I was in counseling, but an hour a week, there's 168 hours in a week, and 1 hour a week of that food for your soul just wasn't enough for me. And I got into podcasts. I was never into podcasts before, but I couldn't find anything that wasn't really prescriptive. And I didn't want to hear about the psychology of grief and the stages of grief and all of the inner workings of grief. I wanted to talk to people who went through the hell of grief and tell me, you other griever, not counselor or psychiatrist, you other griever, tell me how to get through this, because I did not think it was possible. And I just decided, you know what? I can't find what I'm looking for. I'm going to create what I'm looking for. I had no idea what I was doing. It's like, I don't know how to do a podcast. I'd never done a podcast. I had a very successful HR blog, and many, many people listening or reading my HR blog, but I didn't really have any idea, but I just did it. I launched into it. I hired a bunch of people, and here I am today, nearly 2 years later, with something I just love. I pay it back. I pay it forward. It heals me in the process as well. It's been a great experience.
No, I love that. I love that. Yeah. And I think I saw that you've done, 88 plus, episodes in that short period of time. So you have been busy and you figured it out. And like I said, I mean, I find it so interesting, and however you're finding the people that you have as guests, like they're all just so wonderful. So I wanted to make sure that all of my viewers knew how to find you and could start listening too, because I think that we have that in common, right? That we want to help people in a very practical way. And I think that, what we're seeing is that that's what people want. So I think that's really helpful.
I have to tell you that what scared me the most about this was, how was I going to find the people? How was I going to find enough people to do an episode a week? And I was up in the middle of the night, panic stricken. You know how there's just something on the top of your head waiting to explode out. And the minute you wake up, it's there. And that was it. And I can't keep people from coming. And the good news is I have a lot of guests. And the bad news is I have a lot of guests, because people come to me because they have a really sad story to share.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, and I think it's interesting too, because I think that's the one thing, is that when it happens to us, it's a very lonely experience, and we feel like no one else could possibly understand how we feel. But what we quickly find, if we look, is that there are a lot of people who share similar experiences. And so that's why one of the reasons I wanted to invite you too, is so that we could talk about sort of your husband and cancer and what that was like for you. I do have several of my viewers are, they've been caregivers. and for specific people who have then, passed away and having to deal, they talk a lot about guilt and things, and just how to get through that. So I'd love to tell us about your husband, first of all, how you guys met, and then sort of what happened as well.
So Paul and I met online before there was really online dating sites. And we met in I think it was an AOL chat room or something like that, to tell you how long ago that was. And I was the single parent, divorced with 3 kids. I was going to graduate school. I had no social life, and I had to do a thesis and a dissertation, and I had to interview a bunch of people. So I went onto these chat rooms to interview people, because I had 3 little kids at home and I couldn't just be out and about. So he was there and we just started chatting and we really connected. And then I don't know, at that time we're emailing. I don't even know if there was text messaging back then, and we're on the phone. And we finally decided to go on a date. And after the very first date, I came back and told the people I work with, I said, I'm going to marry this guy. And I don't know what it was about him, but there was just something about him. And we dated for 2 years, and he had no children. He was divorced, but had no children. And he took on my 3 kids.
Wow.
And we married in 2001. We moved into the middle of where we both lived, and we were married, built a house. We started this really wonderful life together. Now, I mean, there were rocky times in the beginning because we're blending a family. We've got 3 kids. We've got this stuff going on. He's not been a father before. But our daughter Madison was born about 2.5 years after we got married. And that pulled the family all together. And just, you're a different parent when it's your biological child. Even though you may love your stepchildren like your own, there's still just a different bond with a biological child. And we had a good life. Paul was a good guy. He just honest, never smoked a cigarette in a day in his life, never did an illegal drug. I probably could count on one hand the number of times I saw him drink through our 17-year marriage. He just was that guy who, he was home every night at 6 o'clock, and he was home on the weekends, and the paycheck went in the bank, and you could count on him to be honest and be there and be a good father, be a good husband, a good friend, a good son, just a good human being.
Sounds a little bit like the fairy tale that we're all kind of looking for.
It does. Of course, nothing is perfect. And I always tell people, like, we could have a whole different podcast episode on the things that drive me crazy about him. But obviously, when somebody dies, you focus a little bit less on that because it seems stupid. And the things that drove me crazy about him are things that I would gladly live with today and not say a whole lot about, but they feel important in the moment. And we used to argue about restaurants. He was not food flexible, and we would argue about where we would go to eat. And by the time we would end up getting to the point where we were going out, sometimes we'd be so mad at each other that we wouldn't even be speaking or go out. And now I'm like, that's the least of my worries. I don't care where you want to go. We'll go with my friends, whoever. I'm like, I just want to be with you. That's the end goal. And where we eat doesn't matter.
Right. Absolutely. So then what happened as it relates to his having cancer?
Well, he was really just always a very fit person. And I mean, he got the man cold, where he was, it was catastrophic and impending death, and he would have a cold and just want to be waited on. And those things would happen. But he started to have some, what we thought were cardiac issues. And this was probably in September of 2015. Went to the cardiologist, had all of the tests run, nothing. Then it moved on to, in the winter of 2016, he had some acid reflux, and he couldn't figure that out, and he just couldn't even sleep. And he ended up having to sleep in a different room because he was up all night with this terrible acid reflux. He's back to the doctor. They're giving him all kinds of acid reflux stuff. So then he has a pain in his back. Like, how you sleep on your back funny and you get a kink in it. Yeah. And he just is like, can you rub my back? Can you rub my back constantly? So we're not connecting the dots. They all feel like very independent illnesses or symptoms. And so he's going to the doctor through this whole thing. they did all kinds of stuff. They checked him for a hiatal hernia. They've cleared him on all of the heart stuff. So then he starts to have some shortness of breath. Well, he wasn't exercising a lot, and so I'm thinking maybe now he's golfing, because now we're into the summer of 2015 or 2016, and he's like, I can't walk the golf course and I'm out of breath. I'm really out of shape. I need to work out. And I'm like, well, maybe you have some exercise induced asthma. So he then goes back to the doctor again, and they did a sonogram of his stomach and chest. Well, this is now in, I guess, the end of August, the beginning of September. And he has a follow-up appointment on September 15th, I believe was the date, because it was right before his birthday, which is September 16th. And nothing, we're not getting calls, but it was around September, I think it was the 9th, he called me and he's like, I have to go to the ER. Something's wrong. I tried to walk from the building of where I work to my car and I couldn't even catch my breath. I just sit in the car for like 15 minutes. It was like I ran a marathon. Wow. So I'm thinking he has like walking pneumonia or something. I'm obviously not thinking anything is crazy wrong. Well, he calls me later that night, and I'm now getting our daughter from dance, and she was in a play and she had some type of rehearsal for that. And so I'm managing that, and he calls me and he's like, they want me to go to the ER right away. There's something wrong. And he sends me a picture of his lung, and the fluid around his lung has constricted his lung so much that it's like this big. And they said he was about 24 hours away from his lung collapsing, which could have killed him.
Wow.
So when we get to the ER, they find a lesion on his chest. So now we're into this whole, like, it's out of a sci-fi movie. They're throwing on what I call the hazmat material, and they think he has tuberculosis. Oh. And I said to the doctor, if he has tuberculosis, we're all screwed, because he was somebody that didn't go very many places. And it's like 5 places he went to. And ironically, I had to call the doctor to cancel his appointment that was going to be on the 15th. And they said, oh, we skipped his sonogram. And then they were like, oh, it was the summer and doctors were on vacation and it was Labor Day weekend and we skipped it. So they could have seen it. Somebody should have read that sonogram and seen that, but they didn't. And I was furious at them. And mostly I was just furious, and I needed to be furious at someone. And so that was a good place to be furious with, because I said to them, he was like 24 hours away from maybe dying and having his lung collapse. So that's how serious it was. And had he waited to go to their doctor's appointment, that would have happened to him. So anyhow, we were in our local hospital system, and I just didn't have a level of comfort that they knew what they were talking about. Very nice people, very nice doctors, but they just seemed really confused about what was going on with him. He was in the hospital for 11 days, and they diagnosed him with gastrointestinal cancer. And I didn't have a good feeling about it, so I pulled a bunch of strings and I got him into Johns Hopkins. And the day before we went to our cancer chemo class. We were the 24 hours before we were having his port put in. And we got a call from the doctor, the gastroenterologist or cancer specialist for the gastro area. And she said, change of plans. It's not gastrointestinal cancer, it's lung cancer. And I need to switch you to the different Hopkins, because we were going to DC. Now we needed to go to Baltimore. Mm-hmm. So the cancer that he had, Catherine, was 100% terminal. Like, it's a cancer that impacts non-smoking males in their late 30s to 40s. He was 48 when he was diagnosed. And the typical life expectancy is about 12 months. The mortality rate at 12 months is 85%. Wow. So Paul had cancer for 15 months. 12 months of those 15 months were miserable. They were miserable, painfully, emotionally, psychologically torturous. And it was just a journey that was like nothing else I've ever been on in my life. And it's just, I mean, we can get into all of that. I'll stop because that's a lot of information for you.
Well, yeah, I mean, and wow, right? I mean, it's just there's so much there that we could unpack. I mean, so when you had to then take care of him, I mean, did you just stop the rest of your life and say we need to deal with this? Like, were you trying to work through that?
So
How did
I
you
was
handle
lucky
that?
through that, and I had a daughter who was very active in dance,
Right?
and as I said, she was in a theater show that she was in rehearsals for, so her life went on, and it was actually sweet and sad. She said to me one time, Mom, it's kind of good that this happened to Dad and not you because you're the manager of the family. And
Oh,
so,
sometimes
I
kids
just,
are so practical.
I know. And I said, you're right. But I was the manager on overdrive because you're not just, people don't understand this world until you get thrown into it. But I'm trying to negotiate rides for her and get her where I can. And I'm trying to work and make his appointments, but it wasn't just making his appointments. In the beginning, it was okay because he was relatively functional, but you're dealing with side effects from medications, side
Right.
effects from treatments. You're dealing with, I had a binder that was like this thick because you've got all these different medications and it feels like we're adding and adding and adding all of these medications because it's the chemotherapy, it's the immunotherapy, and then it's the medications that mitigate all of the side effects from that and the side effects from those. And then there's another medication for that. And all of these different things that happened to him. And he did not tolerate therapy well. And I've actually talked to some medical professionals since then because nobody said to us, your husband's going to die, make a quality of life decision.
Well,
People,
that's what I was going to ask you next is like, did they tell you early on that like, to start preparing for the worst, or did they give you sort of hope that he could overcome it?
a little bit of both. So it was kind of like, oh, this is what's going on, and these are the risks, and these are, not the odds, or not he has 3 to 6 months to live or anything like that. But they're like, he's young, he's otherwise healthy, we're going to do these treatments, we're going to try to extend his life as much as possible. But it just really, had we known what we knew on the back end of everything, I don't think he may have done one treatment, but he did 3 different types of treatments, and none of them, even the oncology nurse said, I've never in my 21 years of doing this seen somebody who got every adverse side effect that's on the patient insert.
Mm.
And she said, and you're just resistant to anything to mitigate the side effects. I mean, he was miserable, and he literally did. If it had a side effect of whatever it was, he had it, and he had it the worst case possible. So he was physically miserable, except for when he wasn't getting treatment.
Okay. And you said that went on for about like 12 or 15 months?
So for 12 months, yes, to some iteration, like he would be getting treatment he started his treatment in November. He was diagnosed in September. So we took a really wonderful vacation in October, and we did the Halloween at Disney. And then he started his treatment in November, and he was just sick for that whole holiday season. That went on until probably about March, and then we decided to stop that treatment. It wasn't working. Then he went to chemotherapy, which was terrible. He had 1 chemo treatment, and that just like knocked him out bad. I think if he would have had a second chemo treatment, he would have probably died.
Mm.
And it took him, that was in April, and it took him about June to get over that. And so he started another treatment, which was a pill therapy, in July. And that, again, terrible experience with that. And he spent July and August being pretty sick. And then the cancer moved into his brain at the end of August. And that's when we made the decision to move to hospice care and
Okay.
just let it run its course.
And so realistically, like is that when your grieving started? They talk about anticipatory grief, right? Because that things are coming to, or for you, was it, were you like, for me, I did not start grieving with my son until after everything was done and over and I was out. And then like the world kind of hit me. Was it like that for you, or did you start grieving earlier on?
It was in stages. I knew when he was in the hospital that night before we knew he had cancer, I knew he was going to die. I could just feel it. Like just this horrible feeling came over me, and I knew he was going to die, and I knew it was going to be quick. I don't know why I felt that way. I just did. And so I really started to grieve at that point. But then I went into production mode. Like, I'm a person that if I'm moving, then things can't catch me if I'm moving. And so I'm just managed everything. But I knew in my heart that it wasn't going to go well, and he was getting worse and worse and worse. And then there was the psychological and emotional torture for him. He didn't want to die. There's a rabbi that wrote a book about dying, and he said everybody, the only people that aren't prepared to die are the people who are not dying. And once you're dying, you're prepared to die. That I don't believe that never happened to Paul. He did not want to die. And I'd wake up in the middle of the night and he'd have his arms stretched out to the sky or to the ceiling, and he'd be begging God to save him. And I would just break down and cry, because what can you say to somebody in that situation? Like, hang in there, it'll be okay.
Right.
It'll be better, be strong. Like, there is nothing to say, because he was going to die, and it was going to be a miracle that saved him. And I kept telling him, like, I'm praying for a miracle. I'm believing in a miracle. And I did. I believed in a miracle. But to answer your question, my grieving was in stages. There was some anticipatory grief, especially towards the end, because there was 2 months where we were basically just sitting around waiting for him to die as he deteriorated bit by bit every day. And I remember telling the hospice nurse at one point, like, enough is enough. Like, there's no quality of life. There's no reason for him to be here. He's sleeping probably 23 and a half hours a day. And when he's up, it's not like we're having quality time with him. Right. So, and then of course, afterwards, there's the immediate impact of the grief. And then and I'm still grieving. Like, my daughters are a senior in high school, and all of these things are going by where he should be there. And he's not.
And he passed away when? How long has it been?
December 19th of 2017. So 4 years.
Okay. Which in some instance, it seems like a long time, but it probably doesn't, seem like that long. And so you've created the podcast, and so how did you get through these last 4 years? I mean, what did you, the question I have for you, right? Because there's so many people who are watching this who can relate. And they may be early on, right? What advice would you give them to say, like, how do you, and it's not like life stops, right? I mean, this is the other thing, is it's not like you can just take time to grieve, right? You still have the kids, now you have to, figure out how to support keep supporting yourself. And there's all of these other things. Like, how did you manage?
Well, I did everything. And I joke with people all the time. I'm like, if you would have told me, like, to run down the street naked and that would make me feel better, I probably would have done that at one point, because I just was desperate for anything that I was trying to read. I was trying to go to counseling. I was trying to listen to podcasts. After I cried a lot. After a while, I just got to a point. I remember I was probably like 18 months in, and I was so tired of being miserable. And I felt like I didn't want to be around myself, and nobody wanted to be around me. And I listened to a podcast, and it was on gratitude. And I jokingly tell everyone, but it's true. I was like, fine, I'm going to do this gratitude thing. And I was pissed off about it. And I was like, yeah, okay, whatever. I'm grateful for the sun. I'm grateful for the birds. I'm grateful for the air that I breathe, and at first I really resentfully did it. And I would write down 3 things in the morning and 3 things at night, and I wouldn't repeat them. But then one day I remember I was out on a walk, and it was raining, like just misting rain. And I looked down and I saw this beautiful snail. And I stopped and I took a picture of it. And I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I love the snail. I'm like, this is so pretty. I've never seen a snail before. And it was then that I realized that I was starting to look for things to be grateful for. So seeing that snail was something that I was grateful for. And I just began to kind of open up to the world around me a little bit. And the gratitude is what I think was the first thing that started to shift my perspective. So I will tell you, the first year, I wrote letters to Paul every night. because I had talked to him every day and I told him like everything going on in my day, and now he wasn't here. So I would write him a letter every night and tell him about my day. For 365 days, I did that.
Wow.
And then I backed off of that a little bit. And I also would write, just I journaled whatever. I journaled sometimes angry letters to God. I journaled, just whatever I could to get it out of me, because it was just like stuck, swirling, ruminating, everything. It's like swimming in a cesspool of icky, horrible emotions that you can't get yourself out of.
Yes, no, and I love that. And I know we talked before, so I released my journal, my grief journal. I released that, and the key element in that is 3 elements of gratitude a day. And what I specifically put in there was I'm choosing gratitude, because it does, like you said, even if you're doing it at the beginning and it's, you have to choose it. You have to choose to find gratitude. And yeah, I mean, I think writing, I love that you wrote letters to him. I think that's wonderful. And I remember you talking about on one of your podcasts that I was listening to, and I had never heard it said this way, but you talked about rage on the page.
Yes.
And I thought that was so good. So tell us about, I don't know where, you were talking about, but tell us what it is so that people know.
It's actually a part of meditation, and which is another thing that I've started practicing. And I just want to take a little bit of a left turn and I'll circle back to rage on the page. But meditation doesn't have to be a half hour of sitting and chanting and quieting your mind. It can be 3 minutes of something, if it's a mantra, if it's whatever. So I got into meditation, and I'm still probably 6 months into meditation. And if I can do 15 minutes, I'm so excited. But anyway, and I do guided meditations. I do whatever just to kind of help me, again, get my mind off of my grief or whatever's going on. But rage on the page is a part of meditation, and it's what you do is you sit down and you just write whatever, and it can be as nasty, as horrible, as mean. We live in a society that's like, just think of the positive, focus on the positive, don't think about that, reframe what you're thinking. But sometimes you're just thinking what you're thinking, and it's getting it again out of your head and just writing and sometimes I would write like how pissed off I was that Paul died, and he left me here with these bills and this yard and the leaves and the dogs, and I'm trying to, and I would just write and write and write. And so you do that for as long as you want to. You feel like you've kind of emptied that out, and then you just take some time to sit in reflection. And it's a lot of what I'll do after that, and what the rage on the page after the meditation is really, I'm safe. Like right here in this moment, right now, I am safe. I can choose peace right now in this moment. Mm-hmm. And that's what the healing process becomes, is just taking these little tiny moments of peace and then stitching them together into bigger and bigger moments of peace, until you wake up one day and you're like, oh my gosh, I had an entirely peaceful day yesterday.
Right. No, and I love that. I just love the whole idea of getting your grief out, however it comes out, whether it's writing or talking or screaming. I mean, I tell a lot of our viewers to, go ahead and talk to your loved one. Like you can talk right out loud, and if you're worried, you can go to a quiet place and you can do it and just like have the conversations. And so one of the things that we also talk about is, the fact that people think that, once their loved one passes on, that the relationship kind of ends. What's your thought on that? Do you feel like the relationship ends, or do you feel like you still have an ongoing relationship with Paul?
That's such an interesting question. I mean, I still talk to Paul all the time, and I still talk about him all the time, and especially with my kids, and it's the holidays now. And so we talk about funny things, and we talk about other things that have gone on with him, or little annoying things. My daughter had the basement room, and he was a toe tapper and finger tapper. And so she'd be down there trying to sleep, and he'd be up there tapping away to some kind of Metallica song. And she'll bring that up about how irritated he made her. But so we keep him alive in a lot of what we do. But I feel For me, I always want more, and that's just my personality. So I ask for signs a lot, and I do get signs from him. But I mean, I'll never be happy until I have a full body apparition where he actually speaks to me in a full body apparition. One of my friends just recently said that would scare the hell out of me. I'm like, maybe, but that's just, I
Mhm.
won't be happy until I get to that point. So I feel very much like a single person. I have friends who are widowed that feel married. There's no right or wrong way. And that's
Right.
one thing that's so important, Catherine. Everyone asks me, not everyone, lots of people ask me who are grieving, is this normal? And my answer is always yes. It
Yes.
doesn't matter what it is, but it's normal because there's no rules in grief.
Mhm,
It's
mhm.
it's just how you process it. So I don't feel married. I feel very alone at times and very much without him.
Mhm.
And I try to fill up my life with other things that aren't him because he's not here. And talking to him or to the ghost of him or the spirit of him or the memory of him is not enough to feed my soul.
Mhm, mhm. Well, yeah, and who knows? I mean, you're still in the process. I mean, I spoke with someone, not well, just recently. I released on my YouTube channel a video about a man who had lost his wife, and then he found somebody else, right? And he talked in that episode about how they had to deal with that, because it's not like once you're in a relationship again, it's not like that person necessarily goes away. And so anyways, in that episode, he talked about how their relationship was, and how he explained everything that he was because of his first wife.
Mhm.
And that he then brought that into
Yeah.
his next relationship. And so it's interesting. So the conversation is interesting there.
It's really important because Paul is a part of my life and he always will be. And he's a loving, wonderful part of my life. It's not a divorce where we're pissed off at each other and we're going to go our separate ways. I mean, it's somebody has to create that space or allow that space that I've created.
Mhm.
So it's important.
Well, right. And so how are the kids? What advice can you give to folks who have kids, in terms of, how do you talk to them about it? How do you make sure that they're okay, right? Because obviously you're worried about yourself, right? And you have to heal yourself, but at the same time, you have to worry about your kids. So how did you handle that?
Well, that was kind of a nightmare because my youngest daughter was starting high school. The Paul died in December, and as you know, like in the beginning, the fanfare and everybody's there, and you have lots of attention, and people are filling in the blank spots. But then she started her freshman year at high school without her dad, without all of the people around, and she went to a really dark place. And it's hard enough to be a teenager under typical circumstances, but to
Right.
be a grieving and a dark, I called it the dark night of the soul grief for
Mhm.
a teenager just makes you pretty unpopular for a friend. So we dealt with a lot of abandonment of friends. We dealt with her grief. I mean, she was in therapy, obviously. I was in therapy, but we spent a lot of time together. I had a Saturday night date with her every Saturday night, and we would go to the movies or go to dinner or walk around somewhere, just spend some time, the two of us together, just checking in on her and making sure she's okay. If you have a friend that you can be vulnerable with, having somebody just recognize your child. I had one friend that I called her and I said, would you please take Madison Christmas shopping because she wants to get gifts for people and I don't have anyone to do it. And she did. She picked her up. Not only did she take her Christmas shopping, they went somewhere and made lip gloss. They went out and got ice cream. Madison was the happiest that day I had seen her in a long time. It was the best gift. So just finding that person that isn't you that will take an interest in your child because
Right.
that's what they want, to be noticed and to have someone take interest in them
Oh, that's so nice. Like, I love that. I love that. I
and
love
be that
that.
person for someone else. Like even if
Right.
you're grieving, maybe you can't do it now, but when you're on the other side or in a different space of this, be that person for someone else that you know is grieving.
Well, yeah, and we talk about that a lot. A lot of all of the wonderful viewers that I have are very much about wanting to, one, get through their own grief. But what I find is so many of them say, like, how can I give back? What can I, the whole concept around grief inspired for me is, how do you take your grief and turn it into something and use it to fuel something that's, going to give back to others or give back to the world in general, or, how can you be of service and use that? So, I love that idea. It's really, really nice. Well, so good. So this has been wonderful. Is there anything else that you want to share in terms of what people should know, or something that they, should definitely do? What are your, you talk to so many people who are grieving as well, in addition to your own experience. Give us, what advice can you leave us with? What's the one or two things?
So a couple of things. One is, you don't need permission from anybody to feel any kind of way, or nobody knows what you're going through. This is your journey, and allow it to be your journey. Don't look to other people for validation or permission. Everybody thinks they have the answers and they don't. And number two, just really be kind to yourself and be patient with yourself and give yourself grace. Even, I don't care if you're drinking too much or eating too much or sleeping too much or working too much or exercising too much, give yourself grace. There's enough things to feel bad about in the space of grief. We don't need to pile on the negative voices in our head and the wouldas and couldas and shouldas. The last thing I want to say, Catherine, I hear this from so many people, is they want to know, why did this happen to me? And I tell people that that is a rabbit hole that leads to nowhere, because there is no answer that will make you feel okay. And even if somebody came to me and said, Paul died because he was an angel of the Lord and he was going to save millions of humans from now to the end of time, that wouldn't make me feel better.
Right, exactly.
Anyway, I just, there's nothing that will make you feel better in that, why did this happen to me? The fact is that it happened to you and you are still alive. Live your life the best way that you can. And it's going to take some time to figure that out. No one size fits all. So do whatever it is that you need to do to get yourself through this.
Oh, I love that. I love that. And I love your, mentioning grace, because I think that especially for women, well, and honestly, even men, I mean, giving ourselves a break, we tend to be so hard on ourselves. And so I love that concept of grace. And I think that that's something that we need to keep reiterating over and over again. Well, thank you so much for being here. Go watch Susan's or listen to her podcast, Tendrils of Grief. You can find it everywhere. Leave her a review, send her comments. You can, is there a way they can get in contact with you on your website? Is that how, if they want to contact you, how do they do that?
Go to tendrilsofgrief.com. I love comments. I love to hear from people. I appreciate you and what you're doing. Anytime, we can't talk about this enough. So I love what you're doing.
I agree. So yeah, let's just keep talking and we're all going to get through it. And then I think that, the one thing that I learned, and I'll leave everybody with this, is that, I feel like we need to do this together, and that we need to learn from each other and we need to support each other. So we want to keep that going. And I think that's super special. So thank you so much. I so appreciate it. And we'll talk to you very soon.
Thank you. I really appreciate it.